which is going to be a whisper ramble book review of a book that I thought was going to be quite relevant to this time of year, with it being a spooky season. So the book we're going to be talking about today is House of Leaves. House of Leaves by Mark Z Danielewski. And this is, I guess you would call it a horror novel, but it could also probably fall into kind of literary fiction because of a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about and how it's written and constructed and all the kind of clever stuff that this author does. So yeah, I wanted to talk about it. For a while I was gonna do a video that was gonna be books that I loved but that I wouldn't recommend, but maybe not surprisingly, it's kind of hard to think of that many books that I really loved and I wouldn't be suggesting other people to read, and it would be probably a bit disingenuous anyway because I would recommend this, but just with a lot of caveats around it and kind of to the right person. Case in point being my sister. I haven't seen this book for like 3 years because she's had it at her house and she never got through it. I think she started it several times and didn't finish it, and I just said to her, can I please have it back? And I think she this time around had got to sort of this far through. This far through. So yes, I decided to just do a video dedicated to this book entirely rather than the other idea. So that's why I'm filming this. I also want to say apologies, this book is super shiny, which makes it really nice to do some pressing sounds, but there's gonna be a lot of glare probably coming from the lights, so apologies for that. Anyway, as I mentioned or alluded to, I actually read this quite a long time ago, and I haven't even had it in my house for like several years, but I think I read this in 2020. It was definitely a period of lockdown in the UK because I have memories of literally sitting around the house doing nothing for a whole entire week other than just like reading this day in, day out, like kind of 24/7 and not doing anything else, like moving from my living room to my bedroom and back again, and just reading. So that is definitely when I read it. So my memory, which is I think not great at the best of times, is gonna really have to try and do a job to talk through it, but this book is very good. It is very different. It is very unique and parts of it have really stuck with me, so let's hope that that's sufficient for me to do a good job talking through it. There's not really gonna be any spoilers. I think right at the end I might mention my overall kind of take on it. That would be at the end anyway. So let's talk about the book finally. I'm gonna read the synopsis. So it says, Johnny Truant, wild and troubled sometime employee in an L.A. tattoo parlor, finds a notebook kept by Zampano, a reclusive old man found dead in a cluttered apartment. Herein is the heavily annotated story of the Navidson record. So, will Navidson Navidson, a photojournalist, and his family move into a new house. What happens next is recorded on videotapes and in interviews. Now, the Navidsons are household names. Zampano, writing on loose sheets, stained napkins, crammed notebooks, has compiled what must be the definitive work on the events on Ash Tree Lane. But Johnny Truant has never heard of the Navidson record, nor has anyone else that he knows. And the more he reads about Will Navidson's house, the more frightened he becomes. Paranoia besets him. The worst part is that he can't just dismiss the notebooks as the ramblings of a crazy old man. He's starting to notice things changing around him. And then it just says, immensely imaginative, impossible to put down, impossible to forget. Let's hope so. House of Leaves is thrilling, terrifying, and unlike anything you have ever read before. Which I agree with. It's definitely unique, as I said. So, as you can tell from the back, or the front, it is quite complicated as a book and as a story. There is a lot of different stuff going on and a lot of stuff to unpack within this. But what drew me to reading this book in the first place was I heard on a podcast, the Waterstones podcast. Someone was talking about it rather than it being an interview with the author. But what I heard and what really sparked my interest, and one of the kind of like inciting, I suppose, incidents of the book is the kind of narrative around the family that move into a house and then things start to get weird. And what I heard that I think kind of captures up some of the really uncanny and creepiness to this book is that essentially when the family move in, they are renovating one of the rooms and they go ahead and they get stuff. I think they're putting up some shelves or like installing a unit, and they're having problems. Things just aren't kind of making sense, and they end up remeasuring the dimensions of the room and then the house, and they work out that the measurements inside the house are actually bigger than the measurements of the outside of the house. So what is going on? Like, how can the house be bigger inside than outside? Actually, like, kind of gives me a little bit of chills just thinking about it. I love those kind of uncanny things where you're like, what is going on here? Is there some kind of malicious kind of energy to it? Is it like a bad thing? Is it just quirky? What's going on? So that's kind of one of the very first things that happened with that family. And then not long after, there is like a little doorway that appears in one of the rooms. I think it appears, this is where my memory struggles, or maybe they just couldn't get into it. Anyway, they do eventually open up this doorway, and it leads into a very, very long unexplained death in this apartment, and within the walls and the floor of the apartment there are these really long, deep gouge scratch marks that look like they've been made by some kind of animal. They can't really be explained what they're doing there, so you really start to kind of see the creepy, like uneasy feel to this book and all the kind of events that happen in it. So those were the kind of things that I was like, this sounds like a book I want to read. So yes, probably the thing to talk about though that would make this, or one of the things that makes this quite a difficult book to read, is just the complicated nature of the stories, but also the structure of the book. So as it said, there are kind of three main elements to this structure and this narrative, and they all like intertwine and interweave throughout the book. So going backwards and forwards to these different kind of, not even points of view, but like almost like stories within a story. It can be kind of hard to follow. But yeah, let me kind of show you what I'm talking about. It just makes me laugh, like looking through this book, because it is, we're gonna get onto it, but it is kind of absolutely crazy. So this page kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. The very top of this, bit, like just this bit here, is actually like the kind of the main writing on that page, and then all of the rest of this are footnotes. Because what happens is, it's like layers of story. So Zampano's kind of record, the Navidson record, is like, he's taken this like documentary like of the events that happen in that house, and so that's like our first layer, is like the actual Navidson record, which is the original documentation of what has happened, and then the second layer on top of that is Zampano and his thoughts and his kind of critique and approach to this record. So that kind of sits on top of it. And then the third part is Johnny Truant, who has found Zampano's notes, and then he has his own layer on top of it where he then makes adjustments. So it's like some things are like edited by Johnny that Zampano has said about this documentation stuff. So it's like super complicated in that sense to follow. So we have like the actual the kind of writings themselves, but we also do follow Johnny quite closely as well. I suppose he's kind of the main focus for a lot of the story. So we see him in his day-to-day life where he works at this tattoo studio, and then as he gets more and more interested and involved in reading the Navidson record and Zampano's notes about it, his life kind of deteriorates, his mental health goes downhill, and everything starts to fall apart for him a little bit as he gets into it, and weird things start happening to him as well. So that's the kind of really complicated structure of the book that do make it quite challenging. I think it's not an easy read, but it is, I think, if you want to, invest your time and energy and concentration into it, I think it is a book that investment really pays off. The other really big thing to talk about in terms of kind of how it's written is, and I started laughing when I looked at it earlier, it's just the formatting of this book is absolutely wild. This is the page that made me laugh earlier. If you can see, it is just full of X's, and then the footnotes. There are basically the whole book is like half half of it is like footnotes, and there's like footnotes on the footnotes, like embedded footnotes. Anyway, I was going to talk about the formatting. So a lot of the pages are like, you know, very sparsely populated. There might just be like a couple of sentences, and these are at the bottom of the page. Sometimes they're in the middle of the page, sometimes they're at the top, sometimes they're like almost like a ladder going down. So it's like very what's the word, like the ingenuity, I was gonna say like imaginative, different way of formatting a book, and this is done, I think, that really helps you get a perspective on what the characters are going through, and most of the, I believe most of the time that it is like that, where there's just a couple of words on each page. It's when you're following the events that happen in the Navidson record, so the Weird House, and they really help to kind of give the reader the sense in a way of what's happening. So like I say, kind of like sometimes it's like formatted like a stairway going downwards, and I think that it's meant to give you the kind of feeling of enormous space and sparsity, and kind of like being alone, and kind of also making you feel like really weird that you're reading it like this, and kind of slightly like uncanny, as I said. I think it really helps to bring that atmosphere and the feeling of the book to life for the reader. And I think the best example of this, if I'm gonna try and find it exactly, but there is a really quite a difficult, I think this is the hardest bit to get through in the book. There's a big long old section on the idea of labyrinths, which kind of play into kind of what's going on in the house. Yeah, so I guess this is part of it. I want to find the best representation for you. I think this is probably it. So it's like a really, really long section on labyrinths, kind of exploring their kind of history, the mythology, the design of them, and kind of how they can be utilised and stuff. And the way that it's set out and formatted is the cleverest thing in the entire world, because and I hope it comes across well on the camera, but you end up as a reader being in a labyrinth within the book, literally, because the formatting of the pages, it's like there are all of these, this is a really like unwieldy big book, like inset sections of script. I don't know if you can tell, but I think this side here is actually written upside down, so you actually have to read it like that. And then like all of this isn't like necessarily in order, so again you have like footnotes that will like point to some of these sections, and you have to kind of go back onto the page before and reread like the footnote here that relates to something else, and then you'll be going into the next section, where you have to then like pick up some of the footnotes here. Like it jumbles around, and you're like reading you know, inserts within the text and going through it. And I mean, even here, I don't know if you can see, but like this is what I'm talking about, like some of it's actually like crossed out because that's like edited by Johnny, and this, you know, this section here is like just kind of highlights how difficult it is to read. I'm so bad at getting the book in focus. Anyway, so the experience of reading that, and it's quite a long section. I remember it taking me forever to read, and by the end of it I was exhausted. I did feel like I'd been through a labyrinth myself, and I just have so much admiration for this writer and how he managed to do that, the idea he came up with, and it really is Johnny as well that end up being quite intense and creepy and scary. But it's not a book that really, in the way that some of the Stephen King books that I've read, like The Shining, really have your heart racing and feel like you kind of want to be screaming almost. Like, I don't think it's quite that level of horror. It definitely sits more in the kind of creepy, unsettling, uncanny side of things, but really, really good, very immersive in terms of that as well. I think for me there were definitely sections that I enjoyed a lot more than others. Sometimes Johnny got on my nerves quite a lot, and his sections, whenever it kind of switched fully back to his his kind of perspective, I used to kind of want to get back to the house, because for me that was like where the real most intriguing stuff was. I wanted to hear more about what was going on in the house and with the family, because actually, aside from all of the kind of crazy stuff, I think it is a really interesting, like, the exploration of the impact of all the events on the relationship between Will Navidson and his wife, and because they have kids as well, and his a brother, I think, gets involved, and it's really interesting to see how difficult events and kind of the one partner, Will, he becomes kind of obsessed with what's going on, and he won't let it rest, and how that really impacts the relationship with his wife. And I think that was like a really really interesting as well, really well kind of laid out by the author. But yeah, what I was saying was, with Johnny, definitely his bits I think were slightly less of a pull for me, but there were some really iconic things still from him, and there's like a moment with a dog in particular which is haunting. I think you will always kind of remember it. Like, there are some really difficult to read bits in this book for sure, but Johnny essentially is our kind of main protagonist, is the wrong word, but our main character, because he's definitely not like a fully good person, but yeah, it really does just kind of have like this descent into madness feel about the whole book. The final thing I think to say is the kind of the like intricacies and the detail that the author has put into it, and it actually is his first novel apparently, which is insane. Like, what a crazy first novel to write. Like, I feel like it must have taken him forever surely, because there's so much in it. It is without a doubt 5 stars. I don't think there's any other book like it, certainly not that I've come across. As I've said, I feel like 100 times, this author is so clever, it's so unique and so well done. I've said it's hard to read, there's no getting away from that, but it is so worth it. I think it just comes perfectly together, a perfect alignment of the plot and the structure, the formatting and the characters all make so much sense together. And I think if you tried to kind of replicate this with something else, like a different kind of storyline or a different theme, it wouldn't really work. It just works so perfectly in harmony together. And I think it's well worth the read, and I definitely, just flipping through it, there's so much nostalgia for reading this book. Maybe I should have put this in one of my like top reads, like my favourite books of all time. I kind of regret not having this in there. And just to finish off with a few of the reviews, let's see what other people have said. Superbly inventive, a rare debut, genuinely exciting. A great novel, a phenomenal debut, thrillingly alive, Some of the other ones are genre-defying, a novel in which something is always lurking just out of sight, at once a genuinely scary chiller, a satire on the business of criticism and meditation on the way we read. Yeah, I guess I haven't really touched on that, but I guess the kind of the satire on the criticism, it's how all the footnotes and the kind of the layering works. Loads that I haven't even touched upon or mentioned. One of the novels of the year, a fascinatingly insane triumph. Another really good way to describe it. Fascinatingly insane. And finally, remarkable, genuinely clever and learned, often funny, brilliantly constructed and surprisingly touching. A debut of scintillating intelligence and scope. Yeah, like I say, loads that I'm sure I've missed loads out, and these guys have definitely done a better job of summing it up than I have, but yeah, really, really good. So that's it for the main part, and now I'm gonna put all the spoiler stuff at the end. So yeah, the kind of some of the stuff that I think highlights the creepiness of what happens in the house. So I mentioned the really long hallway, the dark kind of enclosed claustrophobic feeling space. Well, obviously they end up exploring that, in particular Will, because his wife is very much against engaging with this weird phenomena going on in the house. She doesn't really want to deal with it. I think she's very keen to kind of move out, or at least kind of barricade this door and not go down it. But her husband is a photojournalist, so he is by nature quite a kind of curious, inquisitive person who wants to kind of document stuff. So of course he ends up going through it. Now, in my mind, this might not actually be in it. This is maybe just a false memory, but I don't know whether he'd kind of maybe agreed to leave the door alone, and maybe they couldn't get through it to start with. But then I feel like maybe one day the door opens itself or something, kind of inviting them in, which again is super creepy if that's the case. So yeah, he goes exploring, and I think the first time that he goes into this hallway, he can't even get to the end of it because it is that long. So they end up having to go in there fully kitted out, as if they were going on a major expedition with ropes and lights and kind of food and rations and safety equipment. And it's to think that this is all inside the house still is crazy. And then eventually they do make it into the end of this long corridor, which is a huge, ginormous, proportioned, great hall, huge. And I think at the centre of that there is a big staircase, and I think at this point they get some additional help, so they have some actual explorers who would come and help, and these are probably people that have, I can't remember what they do, mountaineering or caving and stuff, out in the world exploring and adventuring, and they end up inside this cavernous, crazy house, and they go down these stairs, which are again the proportions of them are insane, and they can't they just keep going down and down and down, and they can't get to the bottom of them. But yeah, they end up kind of taking overnight expeditions, and then essentially the house and the way that the kind of environment of the house essentially kind of turns something in their brains and makes them, well, not all of them, but it kind of gets to them and kind of starts to send them a little bit mad, because I think it's when you think about space and the infinite vastness of the universe, and the crazy distances and sizes of things out in space, it's kind of like that in the house, in the sense of, I think super creepy and intriguing. And then the Johnny Truant stuff, so as he gets like deeper and more involved with the Navidson record, his life just kind of spirals. Like, I think he loses his job, he's got all these messed up relationships, he's like into drugs and stuff. And then I can't really remember, like I say, Johnny's bits didn't enthrall me quite as much, but I think he ends up like seeing things and stuff happening in his own flat. And then my thoughts about kind of what really was going on. And I really hate to say it, but I didn't think this for most of the way through, but then right at the end, and I can't remember what it was, I think it was something in the appendix that made me think this, but my interpretation of it at the end of it all, sadly, is that I think it was actually kind of something that Johnny himself had kind of made up and was in his own head. I don't think any of that actually happened, which is sad. I wish that I had like a different interpretation on it, and I'm sure that there are, but it was just something that in the appendix, I think, because I think in the appendix, one of the appendices is his mother's, who was kind of committed with mental health problems. So yeah, Johnny had like a really hard life as well, but his mother, I think, said something in a letter that made me really question it all and made me think. And then there's also this really meta reference when Will goes back to the house at the very end, and like, I may as well say it because I've spoiled so much up to this point, but like, House of Leaves, the book, like, Will is actually like reading that when he's in this vast environment at the end of the book, when he's basically like gonna die because he's just there without any food on his own in this like massive cavernous environment. I think he's like hanging off the edge of a cliff or something. And then House of Leaves, I don't know if he brought it in with him or if it just appears, but I just remember reading it and being like, oh my god, the book is in the book. It's crazy. So then that kind of like casts a little bit of doubt as what's going on as well. So yeah, I don't know, that's just my interpretation of it. And as I said, I normally like to buy into things, but just something triggered me into thinking that, and I couldn't get over it. And that's why I really wanted my sister to read the book, because I wanted to know what she thought happened, because I haven't actually spoken to anyone else that's read this, so I could obviously go online. I don't know why I haven't. Maybe I'm a bit nervous to go and see other people's thoughts on it. Okay, so I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I just have so much love for this book. So yeah, as I started the video by saying, you know, this might be a book that I love, but I wouldn't recommend. I definitely rescind that, like, and I'm glad I didn't make that video, because I definitely recommend this book. It's just not for someone that wants to have a really easy, light read. You know, it is dense. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for the easily spooked either. So, loads of caveats around it, but definitely recommend it. Okay, so that's everything.